What happens when an elderly woman gives a piece of bread to a stranger's boy on an empty street? For the village, she becomes a threat. What happened that morning left everyone in the house speechless. She simply handed over the bread, and in the morning, everyone was looking for her. The kitchen smelled of yesterday's soup, dust, and something warm and long forgotten, as if someone had once laughed here. Clara stood by the window, holding half a loaf of bread in her hands, stale with a cracked crust, but still smelling of home. The bread was not fresh, but it was honest, just like Clara herself. Not because she loved everyone indiscriminately, simply because that was how she lived. Don't turn anyone away from your doorstep, and you won't find yourself outside the gate. A draft creaked the door, as if checking to see if she was still alive. Water boiled on the stove, whistling softly, and Clara tapped her finger thoughtfully on the salt shaker. With her left hand, she wrapped a piece of bread in a rag, the same one with an embroidered edge that she had kept since her wedding. Back then, her mother had said, "Let there be warmth in the house, not wealth." There was no wealth, warmth as it came. Outside the window, the village was falling asleep to the sound of its own breathing. The houses were like old people, crooked and silent. The evening was strangely bright, the sky faded, as if boiled in the sun. Clara went out without putting on her hat. A button on her coat was hanging by a thread, but she didn't bother to sew it on. There was no rush. She walked slowly, as if she didn't want to step on the evening. Underfoot was withered grass, and in the air was smoke from someone's fireplace. She wasn't looking for anyone. She just walked along the fence where other people's children often sat, sometimes with candy, sometimes with hungry eyes. Today there was one there, a boy, thin, wearing a jacket 3 sizes too big, and barefoot, completely barefoot, like in the stories about the war in her notebooks. He didn't look at her. He looked through her, as if he already knew she wouldn't chase him away. Clara didn't ask anything, not because she was afraid. She just didn't want to lie to herself that it wasn't her business. She held out the bundle to him. He took it. Their fingers didn't touch, but it seemed to say more than words could express. "Be careful out there," she said quietly, not even knowing if he heard her. He nodded, or so it seemed. Clara returned home, and the first thing she did was wash her hands, long and hard, as if to wash away the anxiety. In the mirror above the sink, she saw her face. Her skin was like parchment, her eyes tired of being kind. No one had slammed doors in this house for a long time. Even time itself moved quietly, as if not to disturb anyone. In the kitchen, the kettle whistled like an old man complaining about the weather. Clara put her mug on the table but didn't drink it. She sat and stared out the window, where nothing was happening. The silence was almost respectable. Almost. Later, closer to midnight, she woke up to barking. Somewhere in the distance, on the edge of the village, dogs were raging as if someone had entered the night, not a human. Clara didn't go to look. She just lay back down and closed her eyes. Words that no one had spoken swirled in her head. Only inside. You went where you weren't wanted again. Who needs that now? She didn't even answer herself. It will only get worse. We've barely begun. Stay, and you'll find out why a simple piece of bread became the beginning of someone else's hatred. Morning came uninvited. Light streamed through the window. Not bright, but annoying, like a neighbor with empty chatter. Clara was no longer asleep, though she kept her eyes closed. Her ears caught sounds. Drops from the pipe, birds in the lilac bushes, and heavy footsteps on the gravel by the fence. None of these sounds were alarming, but together, they were oppressive. She got up slowly. Her knees creaked like old floorboards, and her feet refused to believe that they would have to step on the cold floor again. Her robe hung on the back of a chair, as if offended that it had been forgotten. Clara put it on, picked up an old cup with a tea bag still in it from the night before, and went into the kitchen. The house smelled like yesterday. And loneliness. The sun broke through the curtains, illuminating the dust in the air. It slowly settled, as if Clara herself had settled over the years. She opened the window. Lucia was standing on the doorstep. Lucia didn't need an invitation. Her voice burst into the house like a draft. "Did you go out again yesterday? We saw you hanging around those sheds, sharing your bread again?" Clara didn't answer right away. She didn't like arguing on an empty stomach. She didn't like arguing at all. "It's just bread," she said finally. "Yeah. And then you'll give away your slippers. You've always been too soft. That's why they walk all over you, your whole life." Clara nodded, not because she agreed. It was just easier to nod than to argue. Lucia waved her hand, turned around, and left. She left behind an air that was sticky with her shadow. An old photograph hung on the wall. Clara took it down and wiped the corner. Her husband was in military uniform. Next to him was a boy. Thomas, little Thomas, before the city, before the car, before his wife, who never liked Clara because she was too quiet and didn't ask for anything. Clara remembered how Thomas spilled milk when he was a child. She said nothing. Then she wiped it up herself. That evening, her husband said, "You're too kind. He'll walk all over you." Clara smiled then. But she lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. She went to the sideboard, opened a drawer, and took out a broken clock, the one that no longer ticked. But she wound it every week anyway. Not because she had any hope, it was because she couldn't throw it away. There was a newspaper on the table. On the last page was an advertisement for a new bakery in town. In large, bold letters, it read, "Our bread is made with love." Clara smiled wryly. Love indeed. 40 kilometers away. In cellophane. Odorless. She sat down, finished her cold tea, and looked out the window. Everything was as usual. And everything was wrong. Because now Lucia's words were stuck in her head. "You're too soft. That's why they walk all over you." Clara knew that thought would stay with her for a long time today, maybe forever. We've reached a turning point. What happens next will change everything. You can't miss the ending of this story. Clara had order, not life. Order. Get up at 7. Put the kettle on. Glance out the window twice. Once at the flower bed, once at the gate. No one ever stood at the gate, but she looked anyway, out of old habit, like a dog waiting for someone who had long since left. Her day began with bones. That is, with sensations in her bones. How the chair creaked beneath her, how her back responded to the weather, how her fingers refused to hold the lid of the pot. She didn't complain. There was no one to complain to. Who cares about pain that doesn't bother anyone else? Breakfast was a ritual. Oatmeal, butter on bread that no longer crunched. Clara didn't turn on the radio. It crackled like a relative you're fighting with, but can't bring yourself to abandon. Instead, there were sounds. Water dripping in the sink. The clock pretending to tick. After breakfast, she swept to the floor. Not because it was dirty, but because it had to be done. Then she washed something, usually from her old stash. A curtain, an apron, something that hadn't been worn in a long time. But throwing it away would mean admitting that it was no longer useful. Everything in the house lived by inertia. Even she did. The neighbors called her strange, especially those who came for the summer. They thought that in a village, you couldn't be lonely by choice. Clara never explained. She just nodded when she heard behind her. She feels sorry for everyone, but who feels sorry for her? She had a son, Thomas. She called him that, even though he had long since become Mr. Thomas to everyone else. His wife was sharp, with manicured nails like a TV star. Once Clara offered her some jam, and she looked at her as if there were a poisonous snake in the jar. "We don't eat sugar," she said, and slammed her purse shut. Tomas rarely came to visit. He kept looking at his watch. He sat like a guest who had accidentally wandered into the wrong house. They talked about health, the weather, pensions, never about what was hurting them. She tried once to start a conversation. "Do you remember when we used to bake bread ourselves?" He nodded. "Yes, yes. That was then. By the way, a new bakery has opened in town. They have rosemary and olive bread. It's very fashionable now." Clara silently poured him some tea. He didn't drink it. Her neighbor Lucia visited more often, not out of kindness, but out of curiosity. Her conversations were like a vacuum cleaner. They sucked all the warmth out of the room. "I saw your Thomas in town. New raincoat, new watch. And you're still in the same robe." Clara wasn't angry. She was tired. It felt like even the air in this house was a relic. It didn't smell like life, but like remnants. Old wax, a burnt-out light bulb, a worn doormat. Everything seemed to be waiting to be thrown away. In the evening, Clara sat down to write a letter. She wrote them once a month. She didn't send them. She just wrote. The paper was the same as the one left over from Thomas's school days. "Hello, son. It's warmer today. I baked a cake. But we're out of sugar." You should have seen how the cats laughed. She wrote as if he were still a little boy, as if he were reading. Then she rolled up the letter and put it in a box with the others. There were many of them, as many as the days when she wanted someone to hear her. Clara lit a candle. There was electricity in the house, but the light bulb in the hallway had long since burned out. Tomas had promised to buy a new one. 2 years ago. She placed the candle on the table, looked at the flame, and thought, "I'm not asking for much, just for someone to come in. Or at least knock." And then she remembered that yesterday she had given away some bread, and for the first time in a long time, someone had looked her straight in the eye. Not with pity, not with reproach, just with hunger. Like when Tomas was little and woke up at night in fear. The house was quiet again. Not even the kettle was making a sound. Only the clock, which wasn't working, continued to tick in her head. Beyond that, everything was just darker. The real turning point was close. Chapter 4 would begin what Clara had feared her whole life. The morning was cloudy. The sky was like a sheet forgotten in the washing machine. Gray, heavy, slightly damp. Clara didn't eat breakfast. She drank boiling water. She just held the mug in her hands, as if she could transfer even a drop of warmth to where there had been only cold for a long time. Her fingers were trembling, not from age, from something that had no form, but weighed heavily on her. The first knock on the door was hesitant. The second was more insistent. Clara didn't like it when people knocked, especially like that, with weight, with intention. She approached the door as if it were a needle, not slowly, but with a sense of impending pain. A man was standing on the threshold, a stranger, tall, in a long coat, his face covered with a scarf, his eyes cold. He didn't say hello. "Are you Clara?" She nodded. "Have you seen anyone?" "Yesterday. Late at night. Near the old fence." "A boy?" Clara clenched her fingers, almost imperceptibly. "I was out walking," she said quietly. "I saw someone. Who exactly?" He looked as if he was looking for someone to blame, not a witness, not a person. Clara suddenly felt as if she was dressed wrong, not for the season, not for the occasion, not for life. A boy, barefoot. I gave him some bread. The man flinched slightly, as if struck by lightning. Not for long. When exactly? Towards evening. And where did he go? Clara looked at him, and for the first time she didn't answer. I don't know. He just disappeared. The man stood there for a moment, then nodded briefly. If you remember anything, let me know. He didn't give his name or a reason, just a look, and he walked away without looking back, as if he already knew that Clara wouldn't say anything else. The door closed with a creak. Clara stood there. The floor beneath her feet was colder than usual, as if the house was offended. In the afternoon, she went to the store. Her list was short: bread, salt, candles. Lucia was already standing at the counter, loud as a rooster at dawn. Did you hear? They're going around the village asking questions, looking for something. Did you feed someone again yesterday? Clara pretended not to hear. I only took bread. Lucia wouldn't let up. That's what you get for feeding them. You spend your whole life looking after others. Who looks after you? On the way back, she could feel people watching her. Curtains moved, footsteps stopped. Even the dog at the fence didn't bark, just followed her with its eyes. In the evening, she sat down in the kitchen, but didn't turn on the light. She sat in the semi-darkness, staring out the window at the fading lilacs. It felt as if something was moving inside her, like an old splinter that had been left untouched for so many years had suddenly made itself felt again. And all because of a piece of bread. Simple, ordinary bread. But the world had once again decided that this was enough to condemn her. Clara woke up early, although she hadn't really slept. The sun was shining dimly through the window, but it seemed even darker inside the house. This time, the silence didn't feel like an old friend, but like something foreign, like a person you've lived side by side with your whole life, and then one day, you suddenly realize they never understood you. She boiled the water but didn't drink it. She just watched the steam rise into the air, and she thought, why did she give that bread? Couldn't she have just walked by like everyone else? Or just pretended she didn't notice? Clara knew that people could be blind. You didn't even have to learn how to do it. Close your eyes, walk by, and you're not guilty anymore. Maybe she should have done that too. She sat down at the table and picked up the letter she had written yesterday. She unfolded it. She reread it. Today I baked bread again. Someone said it tasted good. It was a boy. A very little boy. Clara carefully folded the sheet and threw it into the stove. The paper burst into flames, as if it too was ashamed, as if it didn't believe itself. Who was she now? A witness? Guilty? A simpleton who sticks her nose where it doesn't belong? Or just an old woman who still believes that a piece of bread is help, not a crime? Lucia's words echoed in her head. You're too soft. That's why they walk all over you. Clara opened the cupboard where the photo albums were kept. They were old, with worn corners. Thomas was 7 years old, wearing a vest, holding a pie in his hands. She had baked it to cheer him up because his sandwich had been taken away at school. He said, "You're the kindest person I know." And then he grew up, and he said, "You don't know how to live." Now you tell me who was more honest. Clara went out into the yard. There was a pebble lying by the fence, small, round, clean. Not hers. Not from here. She picked it up and clenched it in her fist, and she felt something inside her clench too. A neighbor came up behind her, an old man with a perpetually dissatisfied expression. You were talking to him, weren't you? That boy. Now people are coming and asking questions. How long is this going to go on, Clara? Live like everyone else. Clara looked at him. What do you mean, like everyone else? He shrugged. Don't get involved. Keep quiet. Keep your business to yourself. She nodded, and went back. But inside, everything was boiling, not out of anger, but out of bewilderment. It wasn't like she had done anything wrong, and yet the whole world seemed to be just waiting to accuse her. Clara sat down by the window again. Lilac branches stretched toward the sky outside. The air was silent, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Her body felt cold. There was a lump in her throat. In her heart, she wondered, maybe I really shouldn't feed anyone anymore. The next day, Clara went to the community center, not because she had anywhere else to go. She just wanted to be away from home. She wanted the walls to stop pressing in on her. She didn't want to look out the window and wait for someone to knock again. Or not knock. Just walk in. The foyer was empty, smelling of paint and wet rags. On the wall was a notice about a meeting. Discussion of the incident on the outskirts. Attendance is mandatory. Clara sighed. Mandatory attendance always meant someone else, but it turned out it meant her too. The meeting was the same as always. Wooden chairs, late coughs, someone forgot to turn off their phone, someone else forgot their conscience. There was a lot of talk about safety, about discipline, about how we must stand united against threats. They didn't specify what kind of threats. And then it came. Whoever gave food to outsiders, think about what you've done. You could have helped a fugitive, a lawbreaker, a criminal. Clara raised her head. No one was looking at her. But the air was. She stood up, slowly, uncertainly. But she stood up. I gave him bread, she said. Her voice trembled, but it was audible. Because he was hungry, and because I was too. Someone snorted. Someone whispered, "She's lost her mind." Someone turned away. I wasn't hungry in my body. I was hungry in my soul. I'm not asking you to understand, but please don't pretend you don't care. The silence that followed was not empty. It was angry, oppressive. It contained everything. Condemnation, fear, envy, loneliness. But Clara could no longer remain silent. Even if no one was listening, she spoke. After the meeting, no one approached her. Only Lucia threw a comment at her in the hallway. What? Have you decided to be a heroine? Come to your senses, Clara. This isn't a movie. They'll eat you alive here. Clara didn't answer. But in her chest, she felt as if her heart had finally straightened up, like a person who had been told to sit down all her life and had stood up for the first time. When she got home, she took out all the letters she had written to Thomas. She laid them out on the table. There were almost 100. Not a single one had been sent. She ran her hand over the paper as if it were a sick person's forehead. "This is what you are, my voice," she whispered, without an addressee. That evening, Clara did not light a candle. She sat down by the window and took out an old bundle, a piece of embroidered linen. It contained all that remained of her husband: a badge, a button, 2 photographs. Everything was small and powerless. But it was real. She looked out the window and thought, everything is different now. Even if no one needs me, I won't be silent anymore. Clara sat on a bench near an old temple, not because she believed, not because she was waiting, but simply because it was quiet there. And the sun lingered longer. The stone wall of the temple gave off heat, like her husband's back had once done at night. Clara loved this silence. There were no strangers' glances, only the rustling of leaves and the occasional creak of the cemetery gate. She ran her fingers over the knots in her scarf. One knot was for when Thomas left. The second was for when the cat disappeared. The third was the one she tied yesterday. Clara lived in those knots. They contained all the memories that couldn't be printed on a photo. A girl approached her. Clara knew right away that she wasn't from around there. Her face was clean, Her jacket wasn't right for the season, and her eyes were attentive, the kind of attentiveness you can't teach, the kind you're born with. "Hello," she said. Clara nodded. "Can I sit down?" She nodded again. The girl sat down. Silently, she took an apple out of her pocket. She took a bite. She offered the second one to Clara. "I saw you yesterday," she said quietly, "at the store. No one was listening to you, but I was." Clara took the apple, even though she didn't want to eat it. It was warm, and for some reason, that hurt more than the cold. "I'm Celine," said the girl. "I was sent here to stay with my grandmother for the holidays, but she went to the city for 2 days, and I'm here all alone. Can I sit with you sometimes?" Clara nodded for the third time. Slowly, as if she was afraid that any movement would destroy this rare silence, in which she was not judged or lectured, but simply existed. Celine didn't speak right away. She looked at the people passing by and spoke as if Clara was supposed to listen to her. "My mom yells at me all the time. My grandmother doesn't say a word. But you seem to talk, even when you're silent. I don't know how to do that." Clara smiled, for the first time in a long time. "I didn't know how either. It comes with age, when you get tired of explaining. Aren't you afraid?" "Of what? That you'll be blamed again?" Clara looked up at the sky. Clouds floated by like old letters that no one had opened. "I'm afraid. But living in silence is even scarier." Celine pulled a notebook out of her pocket. "Can I show you something?" Clara nodded. The girl opened the page where it was written crookedly. "Sometimes, kindness is scarier than evil, because you don't expect it." Clara stared at these words for a long time. Then she looked at the girl, and something cracked inside her. It didn't hurt. It was warm, like ice under the sun. "Did you write that?" Celine nodded. "I write when no one is talking, and you're just like that. Quiet, too." They sat there for a while longer. Then Celine stood up. "I'll come back tomorrow, okay?" Clara nodded silently. And there was more life in that nod than in the dozens of phrases she had uttered out of politeness over the past few years. When the girl left, Clara remained seated. The wind ruffled her hair, and she suddenly realized that for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at her, not as an old woman, not as a strange woman, not as Thomas's mother, just as a person. Clara didn't notice the change right away. She got up early, as usual, poured boiling water into a mug, and sat down by the window. But her gaze no longer darted around the room, as if looking for something to latch onto. It just looked, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't looking for danger. She sewed a new pillowcase from an old blouse, white with blue flowers. Her hand remembered the movement of the needle, and her fingers remembered the feel of the cotton. It was amazing. Fabric that had survived so many washings was suddenly useful again, just like her. Celine now came every day. She brought apples and asked about bread. "How do you know when the dough is ready by touch and not by the clock?" "By memory," Clara replied. "Hands don't need a timer. They remember how it should be." They baked together. Celine kneaded furiously, as if taking revenge on the dough for all the crying in her life. Then she would freeze, watching it rise under the towel. "It's breathing," she whispered, "like a kitten." Clara let someone into the kitchen for the first time. It was almost intimate. No one had been in there for years. Even Thomas, when he came to visit, stood in the doorway, like a guest who felt uncomfortable sitting on someone else's stool. But Celine sat down right away, as if she had always been there. They spoke little, but precisely, about books that no one had read, about words that no one said. Celine asked once, "Did you ever have someone who understood you?" Clara fell silent. "I did, but he died before I had a chance to realize it." The girl squeezed her hand, without words, in a grown-up way. Clara sighed. "You see," she said, "now I have you. And that means someone needs me after all." While the bread was in the oven, Clara went out into the yard. She planted onions, not because she needed them. She just wanted something to grow, something that wouldn't look at her reproachfully. The earth accepted them without question. Lucia stopped as she walked by. "What, pretending everything's fine again?" Clara turned around. "I'm not pretending anything anymore. I just have a day, and I'm living it." Lucia snorted, but her gaze wasn't as sharp anymore. It was more confused, as if she didn't know what to say for the first time. Clara felt strange. She was no longer afraid of these women, not because she had become stronger, but because she was tired of being afraid. It had been raining since evening. The sound of raindrops on the roof was steady, like breathing. Clara sat by the window, wrapped in an old scarf, with Celine and her notebook nearby. "Can I draw you?" the girl asked. "I'm not a still life." "Number, you're like a landscape, one that you have to look at for a long time to understand that it's alive." Clara laughed, for the first time out loud. Her voice trembled, but not from pain. That night, she slept without anxiety. She didn't even lock the door, and in the morning, when she approached the mirror, she said to herself for the first time in many years, "Good morning, Clara." She and Celine were baking bread again. The room was warm, as if even the walls had warmed up. Clara watched the girl deftly pour flour, sigh, and mutter to herself. Everything was going as usual, smoothly, along the tracks of a new, quiet life. Until the doorbell rang. Clara wiped her hands and went to answer it. Her heart was beating a little faster, not out of fear, but out of an old anxiety, as if her body knew something before her mind did. The same man was standing at the door, in a coat, this time with a folder in his hands. "May I come in?" Clara took a step back. She nodded. Celine froze in fear by the window. The man placed several photographs on the table. One was blurry and dark, but Clara recognized the face, the same eyes, the same gaze. The boy she had given bread to. "We've been looking for him," he said quietly. "He disappeared the next day. He didn't just leave. He vanished." Clara sat down. Her knees buckled under the weight of his words. "I didn't know anything. He was hungry. He looked so—" "I couldn't." "We're not blaming you," he interrupted. "You're just the last person who saw him." Celine cringed, as if she had been touched, too. "Are you sure it was just bread?" the man added. Clara didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "He told someone that, in that house, they gave him not only food, but also freedom. It's written down. We want to understand what that means." Clara was silent, not because she had nothing to say. It was just that everything inside her had gone quiet. It was as if her heart had shrunk into a fist. She felt the ground slipping away from under her, not because she had done anything, but because now everything she had done could be interpreted in any way. The man left his business card. "If you remember anything else, call me." When he left, Celine came over and hugged her. "It's not true, is it? You just gave him some bread. That's all." Clara closed her eyes. "That's all. But apparently, for some people that's enough to break you." That evening, she burned the remaining letters. All of them. This time, not out of resentment, but because she understood that if even bread could be evidence, then words could be even more so. There was thunder during the night. Clara couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the raindrops pounding on the roof, and she thought, all I did was feed a child. And now I feel like a stranger, even in my own home. In the morning, Clara found a leaflet on the fence. It was a simple piece of paper, poorly printed, but with large, bold text. Don't close your eyes, Tomboy. Don't feed the suspicious. Below that were phone numbers and a signature. Village Initiative Group. She didn't tear it down. She just stood there reading it, as if it were a summons addressed to her. An hour later, Lucia walked by. She didn't stop. She just threw over her shoulder. You should put one up, too, to show that you're not with them. Clara didn't answer. You're silent, and it's as if everything is pointing at you. The neighbor on the right, the one she used to borrow onions from, didn't say hello. The postman didn't come up to the porch, leaving the newspaper in the gate. Even the dogs she fed didn't come near her. It was as if even the animals knew who to avoid now. At the store, the cashier didn't pick up the coin that fell from her hand. She just pushed the change away like a dirty rag. We follow the rules, she said. People are more careful now. Clara watched the flour spill onto the counter from the torn bag. No one swept it up. People are too busy being correct to remember that dust is visible too. At home, she called Tomas. She dialed the number with trembling hands. She listened to the ringing like a prayer. He answered wearily. Mom, I'm busy right now. Is it urgent? Clara wanted to say that she just wanted to hear his voice, that it was hard for her, that she was being blamed, not with words, but with looks, with silence, with absence. But instead, she said, I gave the bread to the boy, and now they think I'm some kind of accomplice. What? Nothing. Forget it. I just wanted you to know. The silence on the other end was worse than words. Mom, can't you just live in peace? Why do you always have to get involved in something? She was silent for a long time. Then she hung up. Not because she was offended, because there was nothing more to say. If even your own voice is no longer on your side, where do you go from there? Celine didn't come that evening. She left a note. Grandma won't let me come. She says you're strange. I'll come when she's gone. Clara folded the piece of paper and placed it carefully in the drawer. The same drawer where Thomas's letters used to lie. Someone threw a small, sharp stone at the window. It didn't break. It was just a reminder. You're being watched. No guns. No trial. Just chosen. That night, she sat in the dark. No candles. No books. She just sat there, and she thought, if you did everything right, why does it hurt so much? On the third day, Clara didn't get out of bed. Not because she was sick. It was just that everything had become the same. The floor, the ceiling, day, night, inside, outside. She lay on her side, listening to her stomach growl with hunger, and didn't move. The house was cold. She didn't light the stove. Because why? For whom? The water in the kettle had boiled away. The stove was covered in dust. The kitchen curtain had slipped off the nail and remained there, crumpled and dirty, as if it had given up. Even the cat that sometimes came in from the street didn't show up. Clara thought, maybe it was ashamed, too. No one came, not the neighbor with her eternal reproaches, not the postman with his cold newspaper, not the boy, not Salen, not Thomas. Only shadows on the wall. Only the clicking of the batteries, like dying words that no one was listening to. Clara got up toward evening. She dressed slowly, as if for the first time. Her robe hung loosely on her shoulders, like someone else's clothes. She went to the shed. There, under the shelf, was a box with her husband's things. She was looking for something specific. She found it. An old wooden frame that had once held a photograph. The picture had long since faded. But that wasn't important. She placed the frame on the table and stared at it for a long time. Then she opened her fingers. The wood cracked when she hit it against the corner of the table. The crack was short, sharp, like a gunshot in an empty room. It was a gesture. Powerless. But it happened. Clara sat down and closed her eyes. "I'm tired," she said aloud. No one answered, and that was the scariest thing of all. She took out the remaining piece of bread, the very one she hadn't given away back then. It was hard as a rock. She brought it to her face and didn't understand why tears were suddenly flowing. The world had turned her into a figure. Threatening, dangerous, suspicious. And she just gave them bread, because she couldn't do anything else. Now her name was Silence. Her face was an abandoned house. Her voice was the creaking of steps. Clara lowered her hands and said, "That's it. Enough." The night was windowless, without light, without breath. Clara lay on the floor, wrapped in an old blanket like a worn-out skin. The room smelled of mold, ash, and something childish, either from the flowered pillow or from the pain she remembered from infancy. Her head was filled with static. Her father sat silently over his plate, her mother wiping away tears with the edge of her apron. Thomas, 5 years old, reaching out to her. "I'm hungry." Thomas, 30 years old, turning away from her voice. Thomas silently closing the door behind him. She remembered how she once stole a bun as a child, because they took her last one away. And then she couldn't eat for a week, not because she was ashamed, but because something stuck inside her. If you take something, it means you're taking it from someone else. That's why she always gave everything away. Everything. Even when no one asked. "I did everything right," she whispered. The Silence agreed, just not for the right people. Clara remembered how she buried her husband, the silent neighbors, Thomas standing apart with his wife, who looked like a queen at the funeral of a slave. She didn't say anything then, because she had been taught since childhood that silence was dignity. Now she knew that sometimes it was a dead end. She stood up and walked over to the mirror. Her hair stuck to her temples. Her eyes were like 2 streaks of salt. She looked at herself, and she said, "What have you become, Clara? The mistress of an empty house? A living fear for your neighbors? A shadow that children shy away from?" She waited for an answer. It didn't come in words. It came in silence, without pity. Only the knowledge. You're tired of being good. Clara went outside. It was late at night. The air was cold, like a collar. There wasn't a single star in the sky. The gravel under her feet was sharp, like memories. She reached the gate, opened it, and stood there as if waiting. No one came. No one was supposed to. She went back inside. She lit a candle. She sat down. She took a piece of paper. She wrote, "I am here, even if you can't see me anymore." And she placed it on the windowsill. No name, no address, no pity. Morning came like a guest who doesn't knock. Light entered the house on its own, without permission. Clara sat at the table, wrapped in an old knitted scarf. On the windowsill was the note she had written during the night. She reread it and didn't put it away. She left it there, as if it were proof. Yes, I said it. Yes, I'm still here. She put the kettle on. She made tea. Real tea. Not boiling water. She even added sugar, the last of the jar she had been saving for guests. And then she smiled wryly. Who do I have for a guest now? Silence? She drank her tea. To the last drop. Without fuss, without hope. Just because she could. And then she went to the shed. She took everything out of it. Old boxes, rotten rags, a rusty stepladder. She piled it all on the fire. She lit it. The fire burned lazily, as if it were tired too. It was not a gesture of despair. It was a gesture of life. She did not watch it burn. She just went into the house. She took a sheet of paper and began to write. Not to her son. Not to the authorities. Not to her neighbors. To herself. I am not a criminal. I am a woman. I gave bread. Because I know what it's like when no one gives. As she was writing, someone knocked on the door. Softly. Carefully. She flinched. Opened it. Selina. Grandma left. I told her I went to get Dill. But I'm here for you. Clara didn't smile. She just stepped aside. The girl came in. Are you okay? Clara sat down. What do you mean? Well, you look like someone who died, but decided to check if they were in a hurry. Clara laughed. For the first time in many days, it wasn't hollow, but breathy. Maybe that's true. Celine took a piece of paper out of her pocket. I wanted to read you something. I wrote it yesterday. She opened it and read, If they take your voice away, shout with your hands. If they take your legs, walk with your heart. If they take your home, become a home for someone else. Clara listened, and she knew that this was exactly what she was going to do. Not for her son, not for other people's opinions, for herself. Because being crossed out doesn't mean you're gone. Because if you stay, even when you've been rejected, you've already won. Clara didn't close the gate, not to herself, not to others. In the morning, she went out into the street wearing the same scarf she had kept for the funeral, and a coat that was as old as the last kind words her son had said to her. On her shoulder was a basket of bread. Next to her was Celine. The girl was holding a sign made of plywood that read, Food is not a crime. They walked toward the center of the village. They walked calmly, without rushing. People turned to look at them, some with contempt, some with fear, some with the expression Clara knew by heart. There's that weirdo again. They stopped at the temple. Clara put the basket on a bench. She opened it. There were loaves of bread, fresh, warm, smelling of life. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't call anyone. She just sat down next to it. A minute later, a boy approached her. Not the same one. A different one. From the village. He timidly took a piece. Clara nodded. Eat. Warmth comes not from the one who gives, but from the one who receives. Lucia approached an hour later. She stood opposite Clara, her arms crossed, her eyes piercing. Do you really think you'll achieve anything with this? Clara looked at her, without malice. I've already achieved something. I've remained myself. Lucia smiled. You've always been strange, and you always will be. Only now you have a slogan. Better a slogan than poison, replied Clara. Take the bread if you want. It doesn't judge you. Lucia didn't take it, but she didn't leave right away. By evening, 3 more people had arrived. One was the postman. One was the woman who had once wiped her hands on Clara's doormat. The third was Thomas himself. Without warning. Without calling. He was in a car parked at the side of the road. He got out. He walked slowly, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. Celine stood between them like a shield. Is that him? She asked. Clara nodded. It's him. Tomas approached. Mom, I read about you in the village group, and I realized I didn't understand anything. Clara didn't move. Is that all you want to say? He looked down. I wasn't there for you, and I didn't believe in you, and I probably can't change, but I couldn't not come. She didn't hug him. She didn't smile. She only said, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just saying, enough. He remained standing. She sat down again. The bread was warm. Celine was nearby. Behind him was the fire, but it no longer burned. The morning in Clara's house began with the smell of bread. Not because someone had baked it. It was because the smell had soaked into the walls, like a life lived slowly but honestly. She stood by the window. Outside there was nothing new. The same trees, the same yard, the same fence. Only something in the air had changed. There were no more letters in the box. The bread was not in the basket. Her son was not sitting on the chair. But everything was in its place, because she was no longer waiting for anything. And that meant she had nothing to lose. On the windowsill was a small stone, the one that had once been thrown through her window. Clara had left it there. Now it was no longer a threat, a symbol, a reminder. Even a stone can become part of a home if you don't throw it back. She went to the mirror. She looked at herself. Hello, she said. And she went to the kitchen. She made coffee. Not oatmeal. Coffee. Because she could. Because she wanted to. Because no one would say, you're doing it wrong again. Someone walked past the door. They didn't knock. Thank God. She wasn't expecting another knock. But she didn't hide either. She sat down at the table. An old tablecloth. One cup. Silence. But now it was different. Now it was hers. Why do you think kindness causes fear in those who have never shown it themselves? Write the word I see in the comments if you also believe that kindness doesn't need permission. And don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories ahead where silence speaks louder than words.